The opportunity from the automation scale is huge, but you got to get it right. I'm a kind of believer that most customer experiences out there at the moment are not really that good. Very few companies do a great job of it. So we better not be automating that at scale.
I think the problem for me is not so much the predictive side. I always talk about the 4 layers of analytics in terms of descriptive, diagnostic, predictive, and prescriptive. I think where the evolution is happening, again, with the help of AI, is on the prescriptive side.
Hi, my name is Jochem van der Veer. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called TheyDo, the journey management platform for business decision making. We raised over $50 million and are growing globally. Our enterprise customers include Ford, J&J, the Home Depot, and Pfizer. I mean, wherever you look, understanding customers is key to staying ahead. But in order to do this at scale, aligning so many different teams with the customer journey is incredibly hard, but it is possible. I really wish this podcast existed before we started our company because so many companies are organizing around journeys and there's so much to learn. So, in order to share what I'm learning, what I'm hearing with our community, I meet with industry experts. And in my video podcast, I'm here to explore the world of business strategy, design, and journeys, customer journeys, to really get an understanding of how leaders are changing their way in their business. So, let's dive into the show. So, today, my guests, plural, spent years building what many consider the defining rivalry in journey orchestration, if you will, or early stages journey management. So today we're going to have a special episode. I've been looking forward to this one for quite a while because I have 2 people on the show, not just one. So I have Mark, who spent a gazillion years at Kitewheel, and then I have Raymond, or Ray, as most people call him, at Thunderhead. 2 companies, 2 visions, 1 market, and they competed hard for like almost a decade. I think you should correct me if that was longer or shorter. And anyone following this space, watch this battle closely, right? But that chapter is behind them because now they've joined forces to build something new, something special, which they call the Institute for Journey Management. Okay, and Mark brings over 30 years of customer analytics and engagement expertise. He founded and led Kitewheel, steering it to market leadership in that space. And then Ray, he spent years at the helm of Thunderhead, one of the most influential names in journey orchestration, which was ultimately acquired by Medallia. And he basically holds 5 patents in this space, which tells you everything about how deeply he shaped it. So 2 pioneers, former rivals, now co-founders. I enjoy being part of the Institute as well. So I got to know these people a little bit. That makes hopefully a more productive discussion today. Mark, Ray, welcome to the Experience Edge.
Thank you, Jochem.
Thank you. Pleased to be here.
Yeah, it's going to be great. Starting maybe like deep into it, but also like with maybe scheduling some general context on how your minds work. Everyone's building AI agents right now. Everyone's building AI workflows. Like, it's very obvious that, especially in the enterprise, a lot of these workflows still are early and are moving into adoption, moving into production. And then what we are seeing, what we're all seeing, and also listeners from this podcast, is like customer experience context, specifically journey context, matters a lot for making them work. So let's start there. Like, why does that actually matter so much in this space? And maybe like, Ray, let's start with you, move over to you, Mark, and start weaving into the conversation from here.
Sure.
Yeah, and maybe I'll take one step back, Jochem, and let's talk about and make sure we define customer journey context. Okay, I think it's important that when we have a conversation, we all agree on what the context is, because there's different definitions in the industry of what it is, and I always think about it as having 4 different elements of it. The first one is temporal. Okay, a context changes over time. It's situational, very. The same customer might need different responses in onboarding, renewal, complaint, compared to others. And context must reflect that specific moment, not just the person. So the combination of the person and the moment. And then key is very situational. Okay, and finally, it's directional. Okay, good context points towards an objective. Reassure, resolve, educate, retain, cross-sell, educate, and suppress. And then maybe another one, which is we always don't like to talk about, it is constrained. Okay, it must include what the enterprise can and cannot do. Okay, and we have to think about the content status from the customer perspective, eligibility as driven, and policy guidance based on governance from the country you live in, the area you live in. So I think if we can all agree on those are the elements of customer journey context, maybe I'll hand over now to Mark to talk about, why does journey context change the economics of generative AI and why it's important.
Yeah. So I guess your core message is right message, right time, right place. And the funny thing about AI, and Jochem, you introduced me by saying I think I had a gazillion years in this space, and things repeat themselves when you've had a gazillion years. And way back 30 years ago, I was big into customer behavior analytics, predicting what customers would do, predicting what the right thing is for a customer, and then kind of taking action on it. And one of the key tenets of my whole belief and my whole approach to that space was that it's not just about the statistics. The best statistical answer isn't necessarily the right answer. It's not necessarily the right direction for the business. And that's down to Ray's final point there, the constraints. Not everything is possible for the business. The business has constraints around how it operates. And so the best statistical answer that might get, maximum response from a customer just might not be possible for you as a business. And you have to build that in. You have to build that in to kind of control what the algorithms are learning. Because you can throw lots of data at algorithms and they'll learn what's there. But will they produce something that is usable by you as a business and actually guides the customer in the right way in the sort of journey world? That's what I call journey context. The kind of context around what is possible, perhaps, but also what does the business actually regard as a good experience for a customer? What does the business see that they would like the customer to experience? How do you embed that in all of the learning that's going on with AI algorithms? And that's if you just throw data at algorithms, they'll learn whatever's there. But what's there? Is your data full of good examples or bad examples?
Exactly. So the gazillion years that you've been doing journey orchestration, like that predates even like the first machine learning models that would allow us to do it, right? A lot of the workflows were deterministic, like step by step, orchestrated in a way, but like it was very predictable what customers would do if they would follow on certain paths. Today, that equation is flipped. So it's very non-deterministic. We don't know exactly what will happen, especially when you think about the customer-facing part. So let's stay there. Like we're going to go into the internal-facing part of journey context in a second. So what has changed dramatically into how we think about journey orchestration, personalization, or showing up to the customer with the right possible next step or with the next best action, given that context is important, even the business context is important? Like what has changed to how you've been starting in this space and where this whole space is now?
Well, I think the biggest kind of current change is the capability, the ability to automate and engage at scale with customers. The whole agentic kind of revolution is making it possible to execute real-time interactions with customers at scale. And that, to me, that's kind of exciting, but it screams out for a need for control. It screams out for a need to set some guidelines, and to not just allow allow the algorithms to just go find some local minimum in the sort of mathematical problem, but for the business to gain some level of control around it and actually be driving it to ensure it's delivering business value to them, because the opportunity from the automation scale is huge, but you got to get it right. And I'm a kind of believer that most customer experiences out there at the moment are not really that good. None of the indexes show us that customer experience is very good. Very few companies do a great job of it. So we better not be automating that at scale, right?
Right,
How
because
about we
that's a
automate
concern,
something
right?
good at
It's like
scale, right?
we have all these processes that are not great, and then we're just add AI on top of it, and then you got a lot of not great, right? That's basically like the one side of the equation.
That's a great way of
Right.
saying it. How do we teach the AI that stuff's not that great? We want it to be something different.
Do you start from scratch? Like, do we, because the promise of journey orchestration has always been like automate at scale, personalization at scale. I mean, one of the promises. So, Ray, do we start from scratch? Do we have to rethink everything now that Gen AI is part of the equation, or is it actually something we can build on what we've already started
No,
plumbing?
I think we can build on. I mean, my history is with a company called Cordiant that was acquired by Pegasystems. Pegasystems bought a company out of Netherlands called KIQ, which was the first true next best action recommendation engine. And really what they started off was the ability to predict medicine for patients, and then translated that into a business like commerce solution. And obviously I'm not as deep as the Rob Walkers of the world and the Peter Van Pattens that are doctorates in artificial intelligence. But when I look at what has changed in terms of the problems we had when we were using the Cordiant next best action decisioning engine at the Citibanks, is the separation of unstructured and structured data. Okay? Primarily in the old world, it was very just structured data. And then you had the Qualtrics's of the world that started doing unstructured data with voice of the customer feedback. And I think the ability for the new technologies driven through, Gen AI with Graph RAG and those to be able to merge those sources and truly give you a holistic understanding of the customer from a structured and unstructured perspective, as well as, organizational context, call center script guides all suddenly become part of the cesspool of information that can be used to make the right decision. I think that's for me the first one. I think the second one is, we've claimed in the space the concept of hyper-personalization. But for me, there's two tiers. The first one is, what is the next best action recommendation, which in many ways, we always talk about one-to-one engagement, but you had, 500 next best action recommendations for 12 million people. That's not one-to-one. I think with the ability for generative AI to be able to use the context of the customer, the context of the touch point, to be able to take the next best action context and personalize specific wording based on the customer, the language, the location, the past history. So the emails that you send, the personalization you send is very, very uniquely specific to an individual versus a broadband. I've got 5 next best actions, therefore I have 500 templates. Now I have 5 next best actions, but I have an infinite number of in the moment generated conversational personalization that truly becomes conversational. I think for me that is, and I think for me that's also going to change the way that consumers expect solutions to have. They don't want a banking system anymore that is point and click. They want to engage with the banking system like they do with a ChatGPT or a Perplexity or a Claude, in terms of a more interactive and engaging system to learn about, their own banking details and what they can do better. So I mean, seriously, is take what we have and we're adding layers on top of it. And I think those layers will get deeper and deeper and deeper, but they still have to be based on, I think the common foundation where we are. I think throwing away what we have is not good, because there's certain levels of complexities that relates to governance, especially in next best action industry. You cannot just give recommendations. You have to understand how the decisions were made, make sure that people of similar context get similar next best action offers, from a regulation perspective. So I think we can build off that, but extend the hyper-personalization context.
The difficulty I see many enterprise organizations specifically struggle with this is that journey orchestration, whether we like it or not, typically sat in the digital team or like in the marketing team, and they would be able to send things what you said, right? The actual next best offer for you, like that was an end goal that we could get to you. But thinking through like the simple banking cases that you mentioned, it's like, yeah, I want to get like conversational with my bank account. I want to know this. I have this question. But typically the answers to those questions or the interfaces where those questions would be surfaced are managed by different teams. They're managed by the mobile app team or like specific product teams that are completely in different places of the organization. But to have like consistent user experience, we're thinking about this whole new layer that typically was in one part of the org and now cuts across all of them. So while it is possible...
I think Gen AI is changing all of that. I think that the concept of silos in many ways is becoming not an issue in organizations. If you take customer context and journey context that we talk about, and let's talk a little bit technical, put it in grab rag, and make that available to any prompt in an organization that happens, that I think the intelligence of the combination of those two, if you have somebody in department A asking a question about Jochem and somebody in department B asking a question about Jochem, okay? The intelligence that sits in this pervasive layer that knows everything about Jochem will surface the responses that in many ways break the silos. I don't have to tell people about this information available. That information is just omnipresent, that everywhere it's used, there's a consistent understanding from the systems itself as to who Jochem is and how we in Department A should treat him, and in Department B how we should treat him.
Yeah, and I think there's a similar thing there, Jochem, and from the customer's perspective, the sort of dream of a single interface, a single place to go to get all the right answers. Mm-hmm. You can see how this interface that we've all become so suddenly familiar with and love of the conversational interface. You can definitely see how that could become this single point of contact for the customer. And as Ray says, then all of the systems behind the scenes kind of connected. I also think there's an interesting kind of internal use thing here that all of this textual data, all the unstructured data that typically historically has not been used to kind of trigger things and act things. Great for this idea of personalization and to use that power to generate personal communications and personal dialogue with a customer. But the other thing is, in that data, there's all sorts of value that can be used by the business as triggers and activities and reasons to do things. So insights, right, that can then drive better and improved interactions. And that's a whole other new area, that kind of internal use of what can be found in that unstructured data and turned into things that historically have not been used for customer interaction. It was very rules-based, numerical kind of, you reach this threshold, you're going to get offer A. If you reach this threshold, you maybe get offer B. Those kind of things you talked about, that kind of marketing approach. Think of all of the value that's embedded in that unstructured data that could give indicators and triggers to a business to act differently and behave differently. So there's a lot of power there in the new wave of AI that's actually looking at unstructured data.
So journey context, the way Ray explained it for the consumer, is one piece, but what you're saying is that the other part is like the business context. Like, do I get it right? That's still journey context, experience context. is essential to get right, to help then the business get the right signals and prioritize the right insights? Or is it less important to you to have journey context there? Like, walk me through like the two sides of how you're thinking about that.
I think, again, I'm not putting everything on, I've been in the ML and AI space for 25 years, a gazillion years, as you say.
See the title of this episode,
level,
right? Gazillions.
Yeah. Again, not at the deepest technical level, but more at how do we get value from these intelligent systems. I think these systems are intelligent enough to interpret and assign journey context. I think when we looked at the efforts that we have with Mark and I building the systems where we're trying to say somebody doing this and somebody doing that and somebody doing this relates to somebody being in this life cycle stage within this journey, the complexity of managing that, which I think has really hurt our space, because every time there's new capabilities in an organization, you have to think about what journey does it change, how does it change the interaction context, and how does that affect the journey context. I think, again, the intelligence of these systems are so amazing, where it can continually assign and understand journey context without somebody having to explicitly do that. And I think if systems like that they do that at a high level identify the journey maps and the expected journey experiences from customers, and you feed that into this model, that the system will be able to be intelligent enough to saying these things happen, these signals occur, these events occurred, and I therefore can assign for Mark that these activities maybe mean, because he's been a customer for 3 years, that he's assigned to journey A in life cycle stage B in journey step 3, but for Jochem, that he's a new customer, the same events has a significant different context. And I think that's where the amazingness of this is, where we're moving away from true in the past and concerned about static journey maps, but those journey maps feed in the concept of expectations to these systems that can be intelligent enough to be able to take all the interactions, structured and unstructured data, and truly identify individual journey context that drives much more individualized conversations with customers by brands.
Yeah. Jochem, I would venture that the concept of journey context is more important internally than it is externally. I think the customer, it is their journey. There's a whole bunch of kind of standard adages about that. It's the customer's journey and so on and so forth. But they just live it. The customers really are just living their experience, right? And they do what comes kind of natural to them. It's very different inside most businesses, where journey isn't their natural way of operation. Their natural way of operation is to be focused on their bit of the business and their goals. And so I feel like if journey context is the idea of bringing people together and getting them to understand the bigger mission and the connected mission, it's almost more important internally that it drives the right kind of thinking and the right kind of activities.
I see that, actually. Like, I think that's true what you're saying, because the journey happens no matter whether you design it or not, or intentional about it. Like, the customer's trying to do something, even trying to become your customer, and then they succeed or not. And basically, like, that's up to you to make sure that that is actually like something that you can get some business value from. But to your point, and this is what is interesting, we saw journey mapping, okay, over like the last 2 decades, like way before my time even, like this was a tool. Then we got journey management, which is almost like the second act, right? We started to understand like, hey, we have a lot of these journeys. They're useful context for the business. Now we need to bring the data in, which is what started to happen. And now we're entering this age of AI, where having shared context, that's actually what it's all about, which journeys were always about, as you say. But now, and this is the interesting thing, I'm curious how you're thinking about it. Journeys used to be something you could own, right? I own this journey. I'm responsible. I'm driving this, or in enterprise language, I just own it, right? And therefore I'm the decision maker, which doesn't gel well with an organization that's vertically organized. There's a lot of these silos or teams operationalizing their own KPIs and basically don't care about the rest. So that always caused a little bit of friction. There are fantastic organizations that are journey-centric. There's also a whole bunch that want to have shared context between those teams that require it to do great business, but then journey ownership gets in their way. So are you also saying that even though journey context is more important internally, like it's about the shared context, or the emphasis should still be on journey?
Well, that's a great point. And actually, this is probably a point, Ray, where we should do a little bit of a plug for the Institute, in that there's a massive information and guides on this whole question of organizational structure, Jochem, because you're absolutely right that how do you work journeys into an organizational structure that's kind of not built for them? And in particular, Ray's written a huge amount of material on recommended structures and recommended approaches to kind of bridge that gap and get a business to operate in a journey-centric, customer-centric, and therefore journey-centric way across an organizational structure that is sort of more traditional. And a whole concept of pods and the way those teams work, and Ray, you can talk in detail about that. I think, but that where context sits in that, and is context the same as overlaying this kind of operating model and organizing structure, or it's something additional, is a very interesting question. I'd love to know what you think of that one, Ray.
I mean, I think we've been in the journey space, and obviously we believe that we can solve world hunger with journeys. I think I came to the realization that, journeys is a means to an end. We had this interesting conversation, and I think, Jochem was one of the guys that triggered the conversation we had at London when we came up with this concept of journey-led value management. And so we even had a conversation. He said, journey-led value management, or is it value-led journey management? So it's an interesting thing, which one do you put ahead of the other? At Thunderhead, we had an interesting thing. We had a professor that was our head of research, and he came up with this really interesting term, moving away from the managed customer journey to the customer managed journey. It's a very subtle, again, very nearly like value-led journey management and journey-led value management. You just change the words around, and it has a significant different meaning of that. And again, I think, harping on where we have transitioned to with AI, I think a lot of the constraints that organizations have to enable customers to manage their own journeys is slowly but dissipating. Because you don't require the banks or the insurance companies or the telcos to have to create a feature and a function in some front-end solution that supports every possible customer desire, understanding, or need that they have. Is, I think, the capability of these systems to allow, as we transition to more conversational interfaces from a consumer perspective, to be able to have these conversations where you've got the intelligence of the customer context, the journey context, the brand's context, the industry context, the global context, to be able to respond reactively to its understanding of what Mark is asking versus what Jochem is asking versus what I'm asking. So I think a lot of those constraints, yes. Will there be bias? Do we have to have governance in place? Yes. But I think, maybe coming back to Jochem's question is, I think one of the biggest failures of us as industry leaders in this space is we always have positioned journeys as projects, where it really has to be an operating model. It has to be embedded in the way your organization operate day to day. It's not going to switch on one day and switch off the next day. It has to be there because that's the way that you succeed as an organization.
Yeah. I guess one final thing to add, Jochem, I think there's a really interesting trend going on. This idea of the customer, how we give the customer help, how we help the customer navigate our organization. What's becoming the most popular way of doing that isn't even one of your tools anymore. People don't come to your website and your call center to get guidance on how to interact with your business. They go somewhere else. They go to ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever it is and asking them, how do I deal with this company? And I think that sudden change of not even being in control anymore of the interface is a big challenge for a lot of organizations.
I mean, we have a founding member, Alterian. I'm telling you what, I'm blown away by what they've done to be able to understand behavior outside of the first-party site of an organization.
Yeah.
You know, the type of things that people are looking for in ChatGPT or Claude and where they go from there on. I think that's for me one of the most exciting and interesting things. I think we still need to be able to, because of privacy, find a way to transition that knowledge maybe into organizations. But the insights they give, again, with the support of narrative generated and discovered by generative AI, is just blowing my mind. And I think you're right, Mark, is that people don't go to BMW website anymore. They go to ChatGPT and say, what version do I have? And how does BMW's organization start becoming aware of what things are people looking for versus the search that happen on BMW.com? So I think the whole industry is changing a lot. So.
If you're enjoying this conversation, don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast channel and leave a review. It makes all the difference. The Experience Edge podcast is where I interview business leaders, CX pioneers, and the best designers who share their insight on creating business impact, having an edge on the customer experience. If you want more exclusive content and behind-the-scenes access, check out the Experience Edge podcast on YouTube and LinkedIn so you don't miss a thing. Now let's get back to the conversation. One of the things that I am, I mean, this is obvious, right? You have companies like Profound and Peak, and there's all these like AI optimization platforms now coming to market to help you exactly with this, like figure out the intent before people land on their site, because this was the number one problem specifically with like the behavioral analytics piece. Like you can measure or you can actually track, right? So really understanding like what happens before we even have vision on like what the person is, or is it even a customer that's coming to our digital platforms where we can track that. That's a wonderful pitch for companies that are understanding like the digital pieces already, but then many organizations, they have like a fragmented landscape of like stores, they have in-person services that they sell into. Like it's so much more fragmented. So the rat race is almost to marry like these two data sets in a new different way. So we have the behavioral data, but then like the intent or the experiential piece of it, which used to be not within reach other than sending a survey and literally asking people how they would feel, which is like sounds like very foreign in these days, but still like that is what people did. And now we're getting the opportunity to bring all of that data into one place to really understand deeply rooted needs, but also like potential behavior. Like so maybe this is more like a lay of the land, like we can jump off to many parts from here. But I want to come back to like the predictive piece of this, because I think like that's fascinating. Would love to get your take on how far away are we from truly understanding, like predicting what is likely to happen for a specific customer or a specific customer group. Because like that used to be like very sophisticated teams would be able to do a little bit of that with a lot of data. And now it seems like we're getting into a reality where this is becoming a potential future on the short term. So I'm really curious to get your take on like how far away are we from this?
I think the problem for me is not so much the predictive side. You know, I always talk about the 4 layers of analytics in terms of descriptive, diagnostic, predictive, and prescriptive. I think where the evolution is happening, again with the help of AI, is on the prescriptive side. When you think that, you know, true ML models by the Pegasystems, by the SAS of the world, by the Incubus, is very, very good in terms of here is a known population of conversations, recommendations, propositions. Here's a population of customers. When Jochem engages on the website, what is the most relevant conversation to have with him? But I think where, for me, the prescriptive side comes in is kind of what you mentioned, Jochem, in terms of that understanding the customer intent and the ability for a system to continuously assess the behaviors of the customers and the consumers. How is that continuously changing our understanding of their needs and their desires and their intent? And therefore prescribing new conversations for customers to have. And I think that is where, for me, the loop is coming much stronger, because now you still have constraints around how you can predict, okay? But if you have this mechanism, this arm, the extended arm that continually says, but people are changing, here are new conversations to have, they become a part of the population of recommendations that you can assess. You have that closed loop that's a lot tighter today than, oh, once a month I'm going to run a prescriptive model to see what has changed. This is continuous, they feed into each other, it's a truly closed loop, and it allows organizations to much quicker understanding the impact of customer changing behavior and the associate conversations they expect to have around that.
Yeah, I totally agree, Ray. Bang on. And I I think that predictive, the whole predictive thing, it's kind of a solved problem, right? Predictive models work. People have been doing it. I've been doing them for 35 years or something. And they work, and they're actually all the same. There is, you collect the data, and you can run any one of 100 different algorithms to kind of predict how would similar customers with similar behavior patterns and similar data respond. And what's kind of improving is it doesn't really matter which algorithm you pick. They all find the same patterns in the data. The problem is they only work kind of 70 to 80% of the time. And that's pretty good if you're a marketer trying to get a little bit of an improvement on your response rates, right? But they don't work all the time because customers aren't always the same. They change. People, there's, no two people are the same. People change their minds. They do something different. It's the randomness of life and the world and the journey that we're all on means that 30%. You don't just do the thing you're expected to do, right?
Yeah.
Rory won the Masters this week. Again, everybody was expecting that, but it doesn't happen every year, right? Because other things change, and that's kind of what you were saying, Ray. This idea that there's something else going on here, and there's other context again, but getting into the drivers underneath that get towards what a customer's kind of core intent is, that can start to fill the gap. Everybody should be using predictive models as much as they can. These things work, they're great, they get you this baseline. But if you want to go further and fill the gaps where things change, you've got to understand more. And that's the sort of intense stuff Ray talks about.
It's almost
the
like
gap between discovery and execution is becoming so much narrower. And I think that's where, again, the value of when we look at traditional journey management, journey mapping solutions that really focused on being part of research in terms of engaging with customers, talking to them, what do you like, et cetera, is the ability for, in the past, two systems that you journey mapping on the one side, and then you have analytics, journey discovery systems, is for these two systems to be now cohesively together, where there's a lot quicker feedback in terms of what's actually happening into the journey management side, where they can very quickly react and say, let me talk to my 20 customers I talked to 3 weeks ago, because what they told me is not what we're seeing in the data we discover in terms of expected outcomes and behaviors. And so very similar to in terms of the gap between predictive and prescriptive is narrowing. I think that's why customer journey management as an ecosystem, as an operating model, is me so excited going forward, because the gaps between those are becoming much smaller, and they're becoming without adding in additional, gates between them. It's becoming a seamless, self-continuous learning system, all based on the journey context and the journey understanding. So,
when you think about it, it's a perfect use case for journeys, right? Mm-hmm. That it's not all about just a single shot, like next best action. We're going to use all of our algorithms and we're going to figure out exactly what Ray wants and we're going to, boom, hit him with it, right? It's not the way it works. We're going to try that, but then what do we do when he doesn't respond? Because it didn't quite fit then. Do we try again? Do we try something different? Those options are exactly kind of what a journey and a journey management system should kind of help a business manage, right? That it doesn't just happen once and we try our best model on Ray. We watch how he responds to things and we track him through time and we try a few different things, because you can't just get it all right with a model. So I think there's actually a great fit here of that, the kind of concept of a journey being this multi-touch, multi-step thing that fits in this kind of world of how you get it right with the customer, because you can't just get it perfect first time.
I had an interesting conversation, again, ClickFox, which was one of the pioneers in this space.
Yeah.
I sat with the CTO and I was trying to get some inside information because he was leaving and stuff. And I said, how do you define a journey? And he said, for us, is a journey is what the customer wants it to be. And I think that's why we're so hardline as a traditional journey map where it starts here and it starts there and it's got these things and stuff like that. Is Mark is only concerned about the journey as long as it supports the way that he perceives the journey for him as an individual. And the same with Jochem and the same with Raymond. And I think, is there something coming where the term journey today drags along with it some element of complexity? When you talk to organizations, Jochem, you try to sell your software and your solutions and your every day. Is there another term that will get people past? The moment I hear journeys, it's complexity. You talked about earlier in terms of different departments having to do different things, and how do we get these to talk together to understand the customer end-to-end journey? Is there another term that journeys will evolve into some other term where the weight of what the word journey brings will dissipate? I'm not sure what it is, but I think it's something we as an industry should start thinking about. Because the moment people I talked to nearly 300 customers at Qualtrics, okay? Love what the concepts we had, but the moment I tell them the type of data you need, the type of operational infrastructure you need, is like, we're not ready. And which hurts us as an industry, and that's why we don't think it as successful as we should be, because every company needs to have a journey-led operating model to make them successful and differentiate.
The problem to solve is different, right? I mean, if you think about journeys and it's for the customer, then you're putting too much emphasis on the individual. So maybe like what I want to offer, like a different perspective on this, like a real use case I saw. So big utilities company, like obviously like a subscription business, right? At some point you're subscribed to getting like your utilities in your house, and off you go. They have all these billing issues. They have all these like bills that are not getting paid and people are not paying on time, and they have all these questions, which puts a lot of load on their support systems, the agents that they literally get called, not just the AI agents, but like the people that they call. It's a big cost. What they realized is like the context for the people that are the highest cost to us is that they're actually like, they don't have access to the proper tooling. So they are not in the digital platform. They don't have the app installed, or they don't have a digital meter at home, like whatever it is. Basically, they're non-digital native customers. So you could say like, okay, good insight, so what? But what they realize is like the context for like the problems around billing and invoicing actually stem from onboarding. So when you think about that, it's not about like the journey, it's not about like the experience, but having some of that language in place would allow them to say, okay, well, the context is we need to have, they onboard like 500,000 customers a year. So those 500,000 better be digital customers, because the cost to serve is lower and they can find their way into their systems easier. They can use ChatGPT to problem solve, get to an help article, get to the place in the application they need to be, whatever it is, right? But the digital customers, they're just better. We can help them better, and therefore we can serve them at a lower cost, which is ultimately better for the customer. We don't need to increase our fees that much, which they don't like about us, which has an impact on brand. But what I'm trying to say is basically this. Understanding that has nothing to do with the specific individual journeys, even though it has a relation to it. It's much more about where in the business does this problem materialize? What are we going to do about it? And how does that compete against all the other things we could be doing? And I think like that's a fascinating question where journey context obviously does matter, because then you could easily say, hey, we're taking it from here, we're putting it there, which is onboarding, which is handled by a completely different set of teams. But we need to find time and resource from them to improve, to change to way they operate, so that downstream of the journey, if you will, we don't have this problem anymore. And it becomes a business problem. Yeah. It becomes the context of the experience, the context of the customer that is actually sold somewhere else in the business. It's not about, oh, I own the billing journey and therefore I'm trying to find solutions in sending a better bill or making less mistakes on that bill, right? Because that's typically what happens.
Yeah, that's right. And who does that in the business?
I talk about those as CX hotspots. I think we talk a little bit of offline in terms of, I'm 65. I started my code days. My life as a software engineer, didn't code for 40 years, and now I'm back vibe coding, which is amazing. It blows my mind. And I've been in the space for a long time. But I'm creating a solution called CX hotspots, and it's exactly what you're talking about is not about the individual customer, but it is how does the population of customers that seem to have similar issues in similar places, at a similar place in the journey, how does that translate into constraints for the customer, but also operating costs and revenue issues and churn issues for the organization. So I think this concept of I want to go beyond friction, because friction has a negative connotation, where I like the term hotspots. For me, it's either positive or negative hotspot, because some of those, as important as to identify a negative situation, do you also have to identify the positive situations that accelerates, the brand being developed and the relationship between the customer and the brand.
If we think about context as infrastructure, journeys as infrastructure, where does that leave the more like traditional customer experience teams as we know them today? I'm really curious to get your take on this. I'm seeing two things. I'm seeing one, you have the old school customer experience teams. They're still optimizing the surveys. I was laughing at this other survey I saw from some company. They added $1 bill to the request if they could fill in a survey. I don't know, that was floating around the internet. Hilarious. But that's like a customer experience team definitely not on top of their game. And then you have the modern customer experience teams who are facilitating the plumbing, making sure this context layer is in place, making sure the teams can operate from it. But not all of the customer experience teams are there. So where does that leave the customer experience function as we know it? Do we even need it? Is it going to be dissolved as a capability? Like, if we think about it in this way, like, what do you see play out right now?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it ties to exactly the story you just told, right? So this utility company has figured out that it's a problem way back in onboarding, causes these problems way down the customer lifecycle, way down the journey. All right. Who is caring about that, and who owns that inside the organization? Who is going to step up above there? No, I do calls to the call center and I make sure our average handle time is below 2.1, whatever it may be. Who steps above that and takes ownership of that? Hang on, I'm going to figure out why this is even happening, because it's happening over there and that's feeding through. To me, that's customer experience, right? That's what that team and the forward thinking groups do. That any customer experience team that their world is just VOC feedback surveys and that data is totally missing the purpose. And I like to call them CX groups, because they've forgotten that they're supposed to care about customers and experience. And it's just become this CX, right? And anybody who talks about themselves as a customer experience person, maybe they get it. Maybe they've stepped up and are trying to look. And that's why journeys are important, because it's the connections across the business that will make the difference. So I believe, Jochem, that's what customer experience needs to step up. And our goal in the Institute for Journey Management is to get those professionals to see the importance of journey management as a tool and a discipline, and an operating model to get those bits connected, and to raise their game beyond just measuring feedback, to impacting customers, improving, delivering better experiences to customers, because that's what's going to drive value to the business.
I think it'll be as difficult for the industry to get away from the term customer experience than it is to get rid of the word journeys, if I may say. I however think that when you hear customer experience, it's truly, like Jochem said, a survey, voice of the customer system. Okay. But when I look at my research work, since I left Qualtrics, and while I was at Qualtrics as part of the generative AI team of what do we do next, is I think those systems, and I think Qualtrics, I know better, is doing an amazing job with that in terms of, in the ad space, it is always, if somebody sees the ad, how do you make sure you monetize the moment of connecting to the customer? And when I look at what Qualtrics is doing, is they're doing the same thing when somebody is in the context of a survey. And I think the word surveys will go away. It'll be moments of connection to the customer. Is how can we maximize that engagement? And instead of, okay, I'm taking 1,000 surveys, then I'm running some batch process, and I create some inner loop conversations and outer loop actions that I have to do, and send an email to 1,000 people with similar patterns of behavior and similar feedback, is how do I, in that moment when the customer is saying, I'm not too happy with my car, is how can they, at that moment, if the system start interacting with the customer to saying, what can I do? I've had people similar to you that had the same issue that resolve. And I think, so for me, there'll be CX companies, but they become more customer engagement from a technology perspective, versus just getting a feedback and then hearing 2 days later about 5,000 people that they had this response. Is truly being able to understand the context, the need, the immediate feedback, resolve that feedback in that moment while the customer is connected to the brand via a survey or some other means.
Don't you think then it's still too much optimizing on like a very small surface? Because whether it's in the moment or like it's an AI native survey or it's still like an old school survey, that's the moment where people give feedback, but it assumes like they are only there to handle when everything goes bad, right? When there is a problem. Shouldn't we focus also
I think the biggest problem that CX companies have is that firstly you have a 3% response rate if you're lucky. And then secondly is of the 3%, 80 to 90% anonymous. So if you have anonymous visitors that respond to surveys, you know nothing about them besides what they enter into this specific response. But that's when I think with the ability of generative AI to be able to, as anonymous visitors respond, to start understanding patterns of response and immediately being able to redirect and have different questions to get a deeper understanding, so your surveys become more conversational, personalized conversations based on a trend that Gen AI has discovered. So it's not a static survey anymore, it becomes a dynamic conversation with a customer. So, I think that to me is where I think they're going to go away. So I think the fact that you're looking things in isolation will slowly over time go away, where every engagement between the customer and the brand, anonymous or known customer, will really start being more relevant to the consumer and the customer based on cohorts of customers that have similar types of feedback.
Would you also then say that you do not see a role for the customer experience groups or the teams to actually play a role in building like the infrastructure, like the context layer, and that unites the teams?
No, I think they have to. I think they have to. I mean, or we invent some other new department. Someone has to step above and connect things together. And I see that as a perfect role for a real customer experience department. Who else ought to be doing that? But or it's right, in some organizations there's perhaps a C-level executive who's able to connect across the business, CEO. But the someone has to own and get above the silos and the partitions in the business and get them to collaborate. And that should be a great job. But that's what it's this. I wish CX departments grabbed that mission and saw that that's how they can deliver the value to the business. At the end of the day, that is what will deliver value to the business, not measuring, NPS and satisfaction rates. Making those connections across, which is a journey discipline, whether you use the word or not, doesn't really matter. It's that's how you can impact, and not everyone will do it, and it sounds like, you see this market that there's a few leaders who are stepping up and changing the way they do customer experience, and they're having a transformational effect on their business. Our hope with the Institute is by sharing and education and building a community, we can get more and more organizations to kind of pick this up. So,
yeah, I see not a little bit differently, just different context is, I think one of the pitfalls for me of CX is that isolated team. That's a small group that's invested, that have in control of their own technology, and they're not really engaging with the CTO and the CIO, et cetera, et cetera. Again, in the terms of us driving CX as an operating model, journeys as an operating model, is the CX team should be the organization as a whole. It's not a small little team. But to be able to do that, I think the CTO and the CIO of the organization need to start taking ownership of how do we enable that operating model? How do we provide CX and journey solutions that are pervasive throughout the organization? And you don't need little CX teams, to be able to stand up and do surveys. Again, I think the context of having to think about what surveys we create will go away, because AI will determine when feedback are needed from which customers at what time along the journey. So I think the whole notion of thinking about how we engage with customers will become a pervasive part of how the organization engages with their customers. And it's dynamic and continues changing over time.
What is the so let's say I'm in one of those forward-looking customer experience teams. I'm not isolated. I have some bridges, I have some connections going, but I do see the need from our organization to actually make the step. And I'm gonna assume there's executive support. Okay, so let's say there's executive support from the top. What does the Institute see as the logical next steps for that team to actually start making that impact, and to start not just have one or two projects or initiatives that are slightly successful, but what is the actual path to success? Is there clear, here's what you do first, here's what you do next? What is what you see at the Institute?
We actually have a very specific recommendation on that. Mentioned earlier, this sort of organizational structure research we've done. The building of a sort of a micro structure to create a team that can execute on a first project or a few first projects. Because getting that win is definitely critical. Getting that win to prove the value it's all about that proving value, proving the money, that's made for the business by doing this that's what starts the ball rolling. But you can't just, or it's very hard to do that with a little project in one area. So you need to kind of create this cross-business pod, as we call it, that brings people together. And so you've got to get the organization right around a bit of technology in a project. And that will make that critical first step of really proving the value and starting the ball rolling. And that's pretty much how I've always seen it happen. To things that ultimately turn into organizational wide use of journeys start in that way, with one thing that kind of proves the value, and that allows them to build.
I think for me, there's an opportunity for a whole new set of services, organizations that can be built around helping brands understand their maturity as it relates to, I'm going to call it a journey-led operating model or a CX-led operating model, in terms of being able to engage organizations to understand throughout the organization, here are the maturity levels, help them assess where they are, and then help find small ways where they can start doing things that moves them from one maturity level to the other. Because it is a process. It is an intense process, but it has to be done in a way where organizations need to be able to see the small initiatives that they do start adding and moving them up, and being able to eventually also see the value to the customer on the one side, and to the organization, that the exchange of value between the customer is what we're doing, giving enough value to the customers, while at the same time give enough value to the shareholders. Because they start being an imbalance, then it starts being, okay, this is not worth what we're doing. So it's really, every initiative needs to be tied to how does it help us progress up the maturity level, and how does it satisfy the concept of value exchange. What I'm doing is giving customer value to the customer, but at the same time giving value to the shareholders.
Do you have an example, like maybe one that is like in your mind, like one of the best journey-centric organizations that you've seen, being part of, and maybe like not just like naming the company or like the industry, but maybe specifically understanding like what were the ingredients they had that made them successful? Maybe ingredients not the right level, but I'm curious like to hear your take on it, and maybe to balance that with one where maybe similar ingredients were there, but they weren't able to pull it off. Like just understand like what is the best that you've seen, and like what is, to some that think like, yes, that's us, what is then the path to make a mess of that?
There's a company in Germany, utilities company, 20 million customers. I can't give their name because it's part of their differentiation. We never talked in the whole sales cycle, in the engagement cycle, working with them on improving our solutions to help them. We never talked to individual departments. We always engaged with a person that was the journey leader, that was responsible for bringing into the conversations the heads of departments, the people working in those operational units. Every time we talk about topics, he was the leader, and he always focused and made sure that every conversation we had with them was always around the end-to-end journey. It's not isolated touch points. And I think I've seen them, the value they got, and there's strong use cases, and most probably on the Medallia website right now, of the value this utilities company received from doing that. But I think it starts at the top. It's unfortunately many journey initiatives are bought at the bottom, but it has to start at the top, and it has to saying we as an organization are committed to make sure that we will operate as a journey-led organization versus a touch-point-led organization.
And this person sat in like board or
He was a
C-suite?
director level he was a director level individual in a big organization with a higher level of seniority, and he not only had accountability for what he needed to do, he also had the authority to be able to do what needed to do. So,
Yeah.
So
Jochem,
curious to hear. Mark, please go ahead.
I've got a good one. Actually, a guy who's on the in the executive group at the Institute. And that's a US organization, Synchrony Financial, one of the largest credit card issuers, 90 million customers or so. But they issue almost completely branded credit cards for other brands. They're the kind of back office, if you like. And I think was a couple of interesting things that made them successful. First of all, the whole thing's run by essentially the guy who's the chief analytics officer. So that was someone who stepped out of the fight between the different product lines and the different divisions. And their organization is super complex because they have all these teams that look after big brands like Best Buy and Amazon and Walmart who have their cards. So they got lots of structure, but he's a centralized analytics leader who had this view of, we got to understand this. And the big reason they got to understand it is no one knows them. What you think you've got is an Amazon card, right? It's just supported and serviced by this organization, and their success is on doing a great job, right? And so they had this, first of all, vision that it's all about the experience. If we make this a bad experience, they're just going to go away because they've got no ties to us. But then someone in a centralized role who had a lot of analytic capability to sort of know that this is an analytics problem at its heart, and was able to get it done because of that central position. So maybe that's going back to your previous question. There's an alternative to the CX department, an independent centralized group who could own this. It can work in terms of the analytics team taking that on. Mm-hmm.
I love that example. Like in both of your cases, like it sounded like having a strong champion with influence and likely a title is what you definitely need to get this done, that is truly bought in and can rally teams from different parts of the organization together, talk about the topics, the problems, whatever. But the other thing that I find interesting, what you said, Mark, is for Synchrony, experience wasn't a thing as they thought, but because the analytics leader could see how the dots were connected, that would actually make it work. So it almost sounds like you need to understand, like from a systems perspective, how it could work, so that it's much easier to see, because otherwise people are optimizing from their local buys, even though they're championing for it. Yeah. They need to understand the whole system, not just the part that they are responsible for.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
On that note,
my conversations with, just quickly in that conversation with the director, the big thing for him was his ability to get the organization to move away from departmental metrics, to journey level metrics, which was a big thing for him in terms of we're not paying people in terms of how short a customer was on a call with the one. Mm-hmm. It was based on the outcomes that drove, and that everybody in the organization was evenly rewarded based on the outcome of journeys versus the outcomes of individual moments.
You've built an incredible database of knowledge, of structures, from org design to how to set this up, to methods, frameworks. Like all of that is part of the Institute. Use cases are there. You're bringing a community together. There's a lot going on. If people listening and they want to know more, because I think like we should definitely do a second episode, because we didn't even get to half of the topics that I wanted to pick your brains on. But I mean, I want to be respectful of the people listening, and also like end their jogging and their commute on a high today. What is the best place where they can engage with the Institute for Journey Management? How can they be part of it, sign up, get a glimpse of all the work you're doing, see your vibe-coded solutions that you're bringing to the world in there, right? Like, what is the easiest place for them to get engaged?
Yeah, great question, Jochem. So we have a community site. You can get to it at www.i4jm.org. So we're it's a non-profit association. So i4jm.org, and you kind of log on, register there. There's a whole set of information available for anybody, that what we call a community membership. You get to join the chat discussions and read a whole set of information for free. And then there's some options to sign up and get deeper information for a monthly fee that all feeds back into growing the institute.
Wonderful. I'm going to put that in the show notes. Is there any special resource that we covered today, for instance, like on the org design, that we might be able to share with people ahead of that so they can get a glimpse of that? Is there anything we can add to
we
the
have
show
a
notes?
lot of material, and it'd be great. It's a great idea to maybe choose some of that and circulate around. Yeah, for sure.
Wonderful. I want to thank you both for digging in deep. Sometimes it's daunting. You have such a wealth of experience, but I think we just scratched the surface today, but we went deep on some topics, and I definitely want to do a second piece. But for now, Ray, thank you so much. Mark, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Jochem.
Appreciate it. And thanks
It
for
was a lot
your
of fun.
participation in the Institute. You bring a lot of value to and credibility to the organization. So.
Yeah.
Happy to keep doing it. All right, and that's it. Thank you so much for listening. If you found this valuable today, don't forget to subscribe to the Experience Edge on your favorite podcast channel, leave a review, and share it with your team. I'd be delighted. Today's episode was brought to you by Daydo, the AI journey management solution for enterprise. To have an edge on your business strategy and to know why your customers do what they do, visit daydo.com and explore more resources to accelerate your customer experience game. And remember, the journey to creating customer-centric impact never ends, and here's always a new edge to discover in doing things differently. Next week, new episode. Until then, keep pushing the edge and stay inspired. See you in the next episode.